to welcome you all to today's webinar. This is about how to investigate the new plastic treaty. This is co-organized by the Pulitzer Center and GRID-Arendal. And sure, I will introduce you our speaker. And of course, we have two main speakers. We have Lars Tordal from GRID-Arendal. I hope I pronounce the name is right. Lars Tordal from GRID-Arendal, who will discuss the life cycle of plastic and its interconnection and create impactful stories about the global plastic treaty. And then our second speakers is Arin Baker, environment correspondent, who will share insights on how to report into the INC process and create impactful stories about the global plastic treaty. And this event will be held in an hour and a half. You can hear the speaker's presentation, and I hope during the presentation you can share. If you have any question, you can write it in the chat room so we can collect the question, and after the presentation I will directly give the question to the speakers. Okay, and I will start now. So the webinar will be start with from me. I am Yogi Tujuliarto. I am from CNN Indonesia correspondent, and I will share a little bit about how the plastic pollution in Indonesia, about my coverage, my past coverage, current coverage, and maybe the next coverage. Okay, I will start now because the time is running now. Okay, I want to ask you all, do you know what is this? What is this picture? Okay, it's like a pile of trash, right? But if you give attention more for this picture, we can see this is a pile of trash, but this is not the regular or ordinary trash. If you can see chimes back there, 3 chimes, this is a factory of pulp and paper. Okay, this is the trash of residual waste, the imported waste from that factory dumped in this area year by year. So this is the imported waste from the factory and dumped in here. Yeah, not RDF from it. This is a landfill of imported plastic waste. This is residual. So this is only the residue. They all have used the material they want to use, and then they dump the residual in this site. This is a huge site. And this is only about 30 or 40 kilometers from Jakarta, Indonesian capital. And then this is not only one, there is a lot of places like this in Indonesia. Okay, please next, Fernanda. Like I said before, this is the residual of the pulp and paper industry raw materials. This raw materials imported from numbers of developed countries like United States, European Union, Japan, Australia, and others. Not all can be utilized as raw material. There are impurities, including plastic and iron. Even in 2019, toxic and dangerous waste was also found imported, such as electronic, automotive, and medical waste. These impurities are residuals, then accumulate and spread to the environment. Then the correlation with this webinar is they came or smuggled the waste from the ocean. They're using a shipment. And why I said this is smuggled? Because yes, the national impurity limit is 2%, but it was exceeded. As you see, the picture, this is more than the raw materials is the waste itself. Next, please, Fernanda. And then since 2019, I made coverage of this imported waste in Indonesia and still making the coverage follow-ups until now. My last published coverage in May 2024, it was collaborative coverage between CNN Indonesia, FYT Philippines, and Today Thailand. It's supported by IMS and helped by journalists from Netherlands. The story explained how developed country sending their waste to developed country in Southeast Asia in purpose. Next, please. This is the 2019 and 2024 coverage about news and documentary about the imported waste from Europe, United States, Australia, come to Indonesia, Philippines, Thailand, etc. Next. And this is the origin of Indonesia's imported waste. Mostly is from United States, globally. But from Europe, the main nation origination sending the waste to Indonesia is Netherlands. So this is critical. I also try to connect to the Netherlands government by email. They reject my interview appointment, and then they just ask me to deliver the question, and then they will answer with email. Please, next. And then I get the confirmation from my question, and they say it's a good business. The waste business is a good business because waste can also trade it and exported, imported. Money can be made through this export-import business situation. And I hope the EU waste shipment regulation enter it maybe in last May. Now will be our hope from Indonesia, because even if agree, this is maybe will be implement in 2.5 years again from now. So I hope it will be committed. Next, please. And then my current coverage, it's still ongoing. I am following up the imported waste residual waste in Indonesia. This is the non-recyclable. It will be burned as an alternative energy, as refuse derived fuel or ADF, and waste briquette. As you see, we have a lot of waste from Europe, and you see the currency from another country we found in the pile of imported waste in Indonesia. Next, please. And my methods, it's like television coverage methods. Usually we use in Indonesia and maybe other countries are using profiles or residents to involve in imported waste, scavenging, collectors to describe the potential risk affected person and communities. And then I give the stories of small and home industries like tofu and tempeh. They're using imported waste as fuel. They burn it because it's cheap, but they don't realize that they have something to risk, like dioxin, pollution, and others. I using online and digital investigation, like you see in the right top picture is, I only use a Google Maps to make sure that this place have a pile of imported plastic waste. And then I go there, I went there and then confirm that this is a pile of imported plastic waste. And then I using the policy and regulation angle, how Indonesia policy and regulation about the plastic waste, international policy, loopholes, and others. And I have challenge because there is a resistant community because they are living from imported waste collecting, like the right bottom picture. They are like scavenger. They pick the good quality of plastic and then they sell it as a good business. And the rest of it, it will be dumped in the open dumping site, like the top right picture. And then the company or industry confirmation, it's very hard to get. So I reaching the association to get the confirmation, and I did it. They want and they will to interview by us. And then the industry raw material demand is very high, like for not only from the pulp and paper industry, but also from the recycle industry, plastic recycle. So I also give the potential solution and recommendation in my coverage as a constructive journalism. I give strengthening the domestic waste management, how we can manage our domestic waste to get not so we cannot import that waste anymore. I also give recommendation or section import regulation and enforcement, and I try to call exporting countries, like I said before, and encourage the policy change and community action. Next, please, Fernanda. And then the imported waste practice is still happen here in Indonesia because it will fulfill the raw materials industry like pulp and papers and recycling industry as form of industry dependence or addiction. We are addiction in plastic imported. And in the meantime, our domestic waste management in Indonesia, either in land and ocean, is still in crisis and requires effective solution. Like you see in this picture, this is what happened in our coast. The trash or the waste, domestic waste from household and people will be delivered from the rivers, and then they will get to the coast, and finally they will go to the oceans. This is the waste, domestic waste situation in Indonesia. Next, please. Okay, thank you all. So this is what I can describe, describe what I did in my coverage about the plastic waste imported from other countries, get into Indonesia, while in Indonesia still struggle with our domestic problem waste. This is something I got to follow up because, and for your information, in 2019, after I giving my coverage about this imported plastic waste, the government and community, all of them moving, they acting, and then the dump site is reducing. And nowadays, like I said before, the waste, residual waste from another country in Indonesia, we will burn it as the RDF or briquette. So this is not, I think this is not the correct solution because we still have something to worry about this solution to burning the residual waste in Indonesia. All right, so that's from me. Like I said before, that this event will be have two main speaker. Next, we will have Lars Tordal. Lars Tordal is principal expert from GRID-Arendal. He specializes in plastic pollution and environmental impacts. So we will hear from him. I will hand over this screen to Lars. If you're ready, Lars.
Yes, thank you very much,
Okay.
Yogi.
The screen is yours.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Yes, and I hope you can all see my screen. So thank you, Yogi, and a pleasure to be with you all. I can see it's really exciting to see that we have so many journalists and participants listening from so many parts of the world. Now, if you are like me, you become really disturbed by seeing some of the photos that Yogi has shown us, which are in fact representative for many contexts and in many places around the world. You will have seen photos, for example, of birds entangled in fishing gear, of animals eating plastics or with plastics in their stomachs. And plastic pollution is, of course, a very visible problem, but there are also less visible aspects, including microplastics and the use of chemicals, and the fact that plastic production emits a lot of greenhouse gases as well. So in my presentation, I'll give you an overview of sort of some of these global aspects, but I'll focus particularly on the negotiations towards a global treaty on plastics. The fact that all UN member states have agreed to address this in a global plastics treaty, or at least agreed to negotiate towards a global plastics treaty, is also an acknowledgement of the urgent need to address this problem. And in the agreement or in the resolution that started this negotiation process, the goal is already set, which is to end plastic pollution. And just to put it in sort of the current situation and where we are today, the next few weeks will see a big push to finalize this agreement. And I don't know if you are following, how much you are following the UN General Assembly in New York, but just yesterday there was a high-level event convened by the president of Kenya and also the prime minister of Norway, where we are based, to really mobilize the political momentum to see this treaty come to realization. So, and as my slide here will show, this is not a small task to negotiate a global treaty. Ending plastic pollution is easier said than done. After the UN Environment Assembly met and agreed in Nairobi at the beginning of 2022 to form a so-called INC, which stands for Intergovernmental Negotiating Committee. This committee, the INC, has met 4 times in Punta del Este, Uruguay, in Paris, France, in Nairobi, Kenya, and also in Ottawa. And the sad fact is that this is a very slow process and painfully slow, I would say. And the progress has not, we are not there, let's say, where we wanted to be, and consensus is mostly absent. So we are now just 2 months away from the final meeting, which is the so-called INC5 in Busan. And we have a document, a so-called compilation of draft texts, let's say a draft or a text that might form part of an agreement, which is around 80 pages long. It is far too detailed. There are far too many things that are not agreed. In fact, nothing is really agreed. So it's a kind of make or break situation at the moment, and that's why we thought it was important also to share and to do what we can to share this with our, you know, as widely as possible, because we really need attention, and we need the final push towards the INC5 in Busan. And just to put this a bit into context, I'll share a few issues or thematic areas that you know, hopefully will enable us all to understand a bit better what this is all about, what is being discussed, and so on. So, and you will probably have heard of the so-called triple planetary crisis, which are the crises of biodiversity, climate change, and pollution. I mean, so the global use of plastics has grown immensely over the last decades. And it's, of course, a very useful material. It's integral to our lives. But despite its many benefits, there are negative sides to plastics, and especially given the current scale of production, the use of chemicals, the lack of circularity, and the mismanagement of plastic waste. And all of these issues, they connect with the 3 planetary crises of climate change, biodiversity loss, and pollution. You know, talking about biodiversity, of course, plastic pollution has a detrimental impact on biodiversity, contributing to imbalances in the environment, degradation of ecosystems, and the loss of species in all types of ecosystems, both on land, you know, water, fresh water, and in the ocean. And pollution, I mean, needless to say, perhaps, but plastics contribute or is a polluter. In fact, between 70 and 80% of all plastics end up in landfills or in the environment. And of course, as you may know, plastics does not degrade naturally. It's an artificial product. So, but it breaks into smaller pieces, which is what we term microplastics or nanoplastics. And there are also thousands and thousands of chemicals in plastics, and we know that some of them have very bad effects on health. In fact, there are many of them we don't know much about, and we regulate only I think it's 130 of these chemicals. When it comes to climate change, I mean, plastics is a key driver because it's a product that is based on fossil fuels, and through the production of plastics and also through the burning of plastics, whether in controlled facilities or open burning, it contributes to greenhouse gas emissions as well. We often talk about the life cycle stages of plastics, and this slide is intended to show a bit what we mean by that. Of course, going through starting with sourcing. So it's about extracting the raw materials that are needed for plastics, typically fossil fuel based sources, and going sort of into the production phase. And this is where the pollution or the climate change effects of plastics are most focused. And then the use phase where we use the products that are made from plastics. They are typically not reused, not refilled. Our systems are not set up sufficiently for reuse or refill. So they most of the time end up as waste in the waste management stage. Now, our waste management systems globally are not large enough. They're not able to cope with all of the waste that is generated. So, which are one of the reasons why plastic waste often ends up polluting the environment. Now, this slide seems to indicate a circular system, but the truth is that this is in reality not a circular system in most cases. We only recycle about 10% of our plastics, and that's of course, as I just mentioned, partly because of a lack of good collection and waste management systems, but it's also because a lot of plastic products are not designed for recycling. There's a lot of so-called composite materials, so plastic is only one ingredient in the material. There are also a lot of chemicals in plastics that don't lend the product, or doesn't. The product is not designed to be put back into a recycling loop. So that's why in a lot of cases, or at least for the most part, plastic either ends up on landfills or is polluted or ends up in the environment. And just to illustrate that point, this slide shows you the sharp rise, the increase in plastic production over the past decades. And at the current rate, unless we take action, we will more than triple the production of primary plastics, that in other words, new plastics into the economy by 2060. So, and it's my view and a lot of other people's view that unless we really take action, unless we agree, and in this case agree on a global treaty that really helps us bring down the production of new plastics to sustainable levels. Unless we achieve that, we set ourselves up for a lot more plastic pollution over the coming years. Now, just to also illustrate a few of the things that a few of the issues that are being let's say that are conceptions or myths, and that has an influence on the negotiation process too, because there are really two, let's say, main political groups, let's say, in these negotiations. You have on one side a group of countries, there are about 60 or 70, that are really pushing for an ambitious agreement, which sets a clear set of rules and measures to address plastic pollution across the across all of the life cycle stages that I just explained earlier. And then there's another group of countries, typically plastic producers, led by some of the Gulf countries, particularly Saudi Arabia, also other countries such as Russia, India, and a few others that look at this problem as a pollution problem. In other words, it's not the plastic production and the use of plastic products that is the issue. It's the fact that we are not able to manage the pollution, that we are not able to collect this the waste and really recycle the waste. Now, on the screen you see three quite common myths in the discussion, in the global discourse, but also sort of a bit influencing the discussions or the negotiations towards a treaty. Myth number one is that plastic production is cheap, and I think we can all agree that when we look for products, typically we find that plastic-based products are very often cheap to buy. But the fact is that the hidden costs of producing plastic is not factored in. There are a lot of subsidies involved in plastic production. There are also costs related to the environmental consequences of plastic pollution that are not factored in to the price of plastic products. And we've estimated that the hidden cost of plastics is at least 10 times bigger than the market price. A second myth is, and I touched on this briefly earlier, the recycling aspects. I mean, so most plastics could be recycled, but whether they are actually recycled or not depends on the cost of doing that recycling. So some of the materials that are so-called composite materials, that you may have plastic in it, there may be other materials in the product, they complicate recycling. They make it, in some cases, impossible to recycle. There are also costs related to the contaminants that are in many of the products, removing them, and so on. So that's one of the reasons why only, I mean, it's in fact less than 10% of plastics is currently recycled. And there are some other reasons too. And then the fifth one on the right-hand side there, or the third one on the screen, may seem a bit contradictory because the messaging is slightly different. But plastic packaging has become an essential part of food safety and quality in many parts of the world. And the use of plastics protects food from it leaves the factory, from it's produced and processed to the time it arrives on the table, on the kitchen table. And plastic has value in that sense, So it's not. I mean, so the notion that plastic packaging for food is unnecessary is not true. The problem is, or the challenge is, the absence of some of these systems to manage the packaging waste from food distribution, which can cause significant harm to the environment, and it's around improving those systems. So the volume of this plastic waste, and especially the use of perhaps single-use items, is what really presents a serious challenge to deal with. So that's just to illustrate a bit some of the myths and some of the conceptions that are, or misconceptions that are also influencing this process. So I'm gonna end it there, but I will just also, before I close, talk a little bit about how GRID-Arendal can support journalists. So we, first and foremost, we work to take some of these issues, some of the scientific issues around not just plastics, but a lot of topics related to the environment, and we try to make them more easily understandable, so that we can communicate more widely and better, and make more informed decisions. And that's our sort of bread and butter, if you will, as GRID-Arendal. And we have a lot of resources. Please think of us as a kind of knowledge bank on this topic. We also intend to support some journalists to actually be able to attend the INC5, the last session of the INC in Busan. And in the next day or two, you will hopefully receive a link inviting you to apply for some travel grants that we have available. And at the INC, we intend to, or we would like to organize some workshops and events where you can gain a better understanding of the negotiations, and also how to sort of help report on the process and on the issue of plastic pollution, why it's important to have a global agreement, and of course not to really experience the final stretch of this process. So that's that. Please be on the lookout for that. And we also, some of us from GRID-Arendal will be at the INC and available to you as resource persons. And we of course also have a network of other organizations that we collaborate with. That would I'm sure will be helpful for you as well. So I'll end it there, Yogi, and back to you.
That's great. Thanks a lot, Lars. We have more insights. We have a new insight, and I really like your graphic visual. I hope the all participants also do. We have some question here, and if you all the participants also want to give a question during the presentation, please, you can write it down in the question and answer features. You can type your question, and then I will try to collect the question after the presentation. The speakers will be answer your question. And now our second speakers will be Arin Baker. She will guide on how to report on these pressing issues and navigate the INC process. And sure, Arin, I won't take your time anymore. Please take it away.
Thanks, Yogi. Thanks, Lars. Yeah, so my name is Arin Baker, and I have spent the past year and few months reporting almost exclusively on the plastic issue for Time Magazine. I was also a Pulitzer Center Ocean Reporting Network Fellow with a focus on plastic. And part of that reporting meant that I was following this INC process quite closely. I went to the negotiations in Nairobi. So what I want to do here is talk to you about the nitty-gritties of reporting this very complicated process, just on the assumption that hopefully many of you will get to go and report on it in person, or at least from a distance. I'm just kind of telling you what I learned from being there. So Fernanda, we can go to the next slide. So the process, the INC final negotiation will happen in Busan, Korea. So in general, these conferences, also for anyone who's been to COP, the big environmental conferences, I've done those as well. They are in themselves very difficult stories to write for a general audience. They're very technical. They require a lot of background and context. And I have found as a journalist writing for a general media that those kind of stories are frankly a little boring. As I like to say, treaty negotiations are kind of like sausage production. Nobody really wants to know what goes on there, but they do like to eat it. So with that in mind, we'll move to the next slide. So while you're not going to write, presumably, a story about just the conference itself, it is a fantastic place to get sources and resources for any other plastic stories that you might be working on. And I hope in the question and answer session after this that we can maybe do a little mini workshop on story ideas, because I've probably written about 30 different stories about different angles of this process. So when you do go to this process, or when you start writing about it from afar, rather than thinking about the INC as one story that you have to write about what happens, think about it as a way or a peg for a bigger story or a more interesting story about how plastic impacts our lives, or how these negotiations will make a difference going forward, either for the climate or for ourselves. So if you go into this knowing that you have a bigger picture story, you're going to come out with that story. But if you go in not knowing what the story is, it is such a confusing, hectic environment that it will probably be too late to zero in, because by the time you get or you figure out what your story is, everybody will have gone home. So next slide. So here's my little tips and tricks. First off, you really want to, and you guys are all going to have access to these slides afterwards, so you don't have to write it down. But you want to get on the mailing list or the WhatsApp list of all the NGOs, all the organizations that are there. They're a huge resource in terms of what the policy negotiations are, what the background is. They also have graphs, numbers, all those little informational nuggets that everyone likes to put in a story about, you know, if you filled up Central Park to the height of the Empire State, that's how much plastic pollution is produced every year. These things like that. All of these guys have these great analogies and very colorful detail. That's a huge resource in your reporting. And if you're on the ground, or if you're dialing in from abroad, go to the press conferences. Again, the press conferences might be a little too much in the weeds for you, but what I find is that the question and answer session at the end of a press conference is actually very useful. You meet people who are active, who have an issue to raise, who are combative, who might disagree with what happened at the press conference. These are your best sources. So you want to find them, track them down, and talk to them after the press conference to get different angles. So that's why you go more than what is said. And I mean, obviously the press conference is important, but I find afterwards even more important. Okay, we can go to the next slide. And that's the other thing. At these negotiation sessions, the first general negotiation is open to journalists. But all the nitty gritty, everybody going down through the details of each little element of the actual treaty, all of that is not open to journalists. But that's the interesting part, right? That's when you find out that Iran and Saudi Arabia were binding together to object to something that Fiji wanted. And so those are the details that make it interesting and make your story come alive. And the best way to find out about that is to talk to people who were in the room. So that's why I like to hang out after the negotiating process and watch everybody come out the door. And I kind of grab them like, oh, so-and-so negotiator from Fiji, let's go get a coffee. Tell me what you just saw. It's a little aggressive, but I actually find it very fruitful. You just have to swallow your fear, your pride, and just go in. In terms of the press room, the actual physical press room, when you're there, for those who will be going to Korea, really good for charging your phone, your computer, but frankly, nothing ever happens there. So go in, take a rest, eat a snack, get coffee if there is coffee. But don't hang out there for too long because you're just going to miss something. Okay, next slide. Oh, and this is my other favorite trick. You will notice that all of the big hotels around the conference where delegates are staying, when you walk into the lobby, you'll usually see off to the side somewhere, there will be like a signpost that talks about all of the events, like whether it's a conference or a meeting room or a dinner. And so you'll see like Exxon lunch. And if you know who the players are, you're going to realize that Exxon is probably sponsoring some sort of lobbyist group or is sponsoring Saudi Arabia, or this is just an example, don't quote me on it. But you start like, or you see that the Scientist Coalition is doing something, or the American Chemistry Council. You want to get in. You might get kicked out, but if you get in, again, it's a great way to get color. It's a great way to meet people. You might get a quote or two. So that's also another way to get around some of the barriers to reporting there. And then while you're there as well, you start looking for the Scientist Coalition, the High Ambition Coalition, all these different coalitions that are also kind of very active. They're not lobby groups per se, but they definitely have a specific angle that they're pushing. So they will be much more open to journalists, but I find that they have a lot of nuance and context that it's worth talking to them about. One thing you do want to do before you start talking to them is look at what their stance is online, what their manifesto is, so to speak, because it might sound good, but then when you start digging in a little bit, thinking about it, you realize, wait, hang on, reducing plastic pollution through better recycling sounds really good, but then you're like, well, hang on, who's in charge of the recycling? What does that look like? So you just have to be able to challenge and have a good follow-up question to understand exactly what these groups are pushing. Okay, next slide. So some more logistics. So yeah, everyone does the networking at the coffee breaks and the lunch breaks. So you should be ready to buy and drink a lot of coffees with people. I find that's the best way. When you have somebody sitting down with a coffee in front of them, they can't walk away. So you get them for at least 5 minutes, and that's enough for a good quote or an angle. And same thing. When I'm there, I like to sign up for every possible press conference. I put my name on their list. I RSVP. I apologize in advance for the organizers of these press conferences. I'm not going to make all of them, but doing so means that I get on their mailing list. And if I find that all of a sudden I'm at loose ends, the negotiations are going on in the main hall, so I can't report there. If I'm walking towards a press conference or I'm there, it gives me either a direction so I can meet people, or I show up at the press conference anyway, and hopefully we'll find something while I'm there. Okay, next slide. Oh, yes, if you're running around trying to report all the time, and you're drinking a lot of coffee, unlikely that you're going to be having enough time to eat lunch. So bring energy bars, grab a cookie so that you can sit in a corner and eat it really quickly, because actually that lunch break is when you're going to be wanting to network, so you won't have time to eat. So this is just general journal. I've been a journalist for 25 years, so this isn't just plastics, but this is my go-to advice for any journalist at the end of any interview. Is I always ask, of the people who disagree with your point of view, who do you respect the most? That's a great way to get a different take on a story. So you want to ask that, and then I just more generally ask, like, who else should I talk to? And usually one source will lead to several other sources that you probably didn't even know about. So that's also a useful question. Next slide. Yeah, the other thing is with all of these conferences, and again, this is like the COP conferences as well, you're talking to so many people that like you can write down a quote in your notebook. You're like, oh yeah, I'll remember that was the Scientist Coalition scientist. But at the end of the day, after you've done this like 16 times, you will not remember who said what. So always, always, always just write the name first before you write down the quotes. And then in terms of, oh, sorry, my text was a little wonky. In terms of keeping track of who I talk to, what I usually do is do a spreadsheet, or I do a Word document. And even before I go to a conference like this, I have a wish list of people that I want to talk to. And I'm constantly adding to that wish list. And then I change the color coding every time I talk to someone. So I can scan down my list and see like, oh, I talked to them, didn't talk to them. Oh, I emailed them, but they never responded. I need to follow up. So that's another trick to just sort of make sure that you cover all your bases, because again, it's so hectic while you're at these conferences. You want to make sure that you're getting who you need. Next slide. Before you go to Busan, before you start reporting this project, again, like I said at the very beginning, have a story idea before you get there. The story might change, it will change, but if you don't go with a story in mind before you get there, you won't even know what kind of questions to ask. And you definitely want to do your research ahead of time. Go like GRID-Arendal's reports, all the different coalitions, the different NGOs, the financial reports from, say, the American Chemistry Council, all the various fossil fuel producing or plastics producing groups. You want to know what you're talking about. You do not want to be spending time with a spokesperson from Exxon saying like, now wait, how do you make plastic from gas? Like, that's not the right person to talk to about it. So make sure you know enough to be able to ask the right questions, which just means reading a lot before you go. Read reports, but also read journalistic pieces that have been written before you. And I've also got a list of some stories that have come up recently, but I mean, just Google plastic or do a Google alert for plastic and you'll get plenty. Next slide. Yes, if you are focusing on a specific region and the plastic issues there, like say Indonesia, for example, you want to make sure that you know who the negotiators are. If you can usually figure it out on Google Images, what they look like, so you know how to stop them when they come out of the negotiating room, so you can ask them more specific questions. Ideally, reach out to them before you go so that you actually have an interview or two set up that you can see, like that you can go and write in when you get there. That will help. And the same way, you want to identify different lawmakers and government agencies. So like, for example, I tend to write about the American angle of things. So I want to look at people at the EPA in different areas, or the American Chemistry Council, so I know who to talk to there because it's an American angle. If you're coming from Europe, go to the EU or AOSIS. There's all different groups depending on where you're coming from. Next slide. Oops, already did that one. Next slide. And as I said before, you want to get on the mailing list of all the NGOs, and they will have the background briefings for you. Next slide. And oh, yes. So if you're interested in more the nitty-gritty lobbying, corruption, money, follow the money story, a really good resource is Open Secrets, Vote Watch Europe, the EU Transparency Register, lobbying disclosure database. These are all really useful sources to figure out what maybe a good follow the money story is. Next slide. Yes, FOIA. So FOIA requests are super useful, but I have found, at least with FOIA requests in the United States, that they're not speedy. It took me 7 months for my first FOIA response. So I would say if you're like looking to do a FOIA now, you're probably too late. But what you can do is look at previous FOIAs, which are also public. So MuckRack, for example, is a really good resource for American FOIAs. You can look and see who else has done a FOIA before on plastic, or the EPA, or lobbying, and you can see exactly what question they asked, and you can see all the publicly available reports that came back. And that's also been a really good shortcut for getting the information you want without having to wait for a FOIA or go through the rigmarole of applying for it. And you also have to pay for a FOIA, so it's another cheap way of getting the information. Next slide. Yeah, and so when we send out a package, we will give you some links to look at. I'm happy to answer any other questions and talk stories.
Thank you, Arin. Wow, I think after hearing your presentation, all of us ready to go to the ink process. That's very, very clear, and you give us very tips, a lot of tips, and I think we also ready for our energy bar to the conference. Okay, our next session, it will be a Q&A. I already collected, at least there's a 5-person questioning. And before that, I want to give you the information that the participant in this webinar coming from Pakistan, Togo, Bogota in Colombia, Penka, Cameroon, Sri Lanka, and if any of you have a chance to write down where you come from, please write it in the chat room. And we have, like I said, we have 5 questions from 5 persons. First is from Bernard. Bernard is questioning about the academia doing a good job in communication plastic pollution. Okay, that's the first question. I think Bernard write about 2 questions actually about academia, and then given that there is all this work being done and little work being done on the communication of that work, so how about academia? And then the second question from Bernard, also, we journalists need to sit down and have conversation to speak talk and debates, foster exchange of ideas, and facilitate learning about environmental governance and policy making. How does the politics prioritize this? So 2 questions about the academia and the politics prioritize this. Maybe Lars or Arin can give perspective about this question, please. Lars, maybe you first.
Let me try and address the first one. I think our academics doing a good enough job in communicating on plastics. I think a lot of progress has been made on this. There are a lot of, there is so much information out there. I think the challenge is a little bit to digest the volume and also the complexity of that information. And so in that sense, I think the more we can try and provide that bridge between what academia finds, the research findings, the science behind plastics, and the actions that are needed by, from politicians, for example, with regards to what measures need to go into the treaty, there is still a lot of work to do on that, on providing that bridge, and that work can be done by, of course, by scientists or themselves, but I think there's also a role to be played for other actors in that space. I mean, GRID-Arendal is one of them that can help sort of translate the science into sort of suggestions or to really inform the policy making. But because I think we need to accept that the decisions that happens in the political space are based on science, but not science alone. I mean, we like to think that knowledge is power, but most of the time the power is about other things than the knowledge that comes from science. So we need to strengthen that link for sure. I don't know if Erin wants to add to that.
Please,
well,
Erin.
I would say that in a way, that's our job as journalists, right? We should be taking that academic research, which I read all of the academic papers as much as possible, all the new scientific advances, and then I want to talk to the scientists. And I feel like my job is to translate this very high level academic or scientific finding into something that a general audience can understand. So sometimes if the scientists are sort of too much in the ivory tower, too much in the science, they won't even think about reaching out to journalists. And I think maybe there we need to build more of a bridge. But I think the way that journalists can work together with academics is basically talking to them more and getting their information out there.
Sure, we all agree that the journalists, the scientists need we need a bridge from the scientists to the people, because we all know that the science language is pretty much high if we deliver directly to the people, to the person, to the viewers. they won't be able to handle the scientist language, right? So we need to simplify the language. We need to give them example, and then the journalist it will be have the role to be part of this messenger for the scientist project or maybe results. So how about the next question? Or maybe Bernard, if you have any following question, you can write it down again, or maybe you can raise hand, or we can communicate here with audio and video. That's fine. And if another participant want to give a question and by raise hand, please be my guest. And the second one is coming from Sarah Hussein. Sarah Hussein is asking about waste to energy issues. Okay. She I think she lived in Japan for a while. Incineration is hugely popular in Japan, and it's seen as good option for avoiding landfill and leakage. But she wants to know, are these circumstances which can be beneficial, or maybe any case to be made to compare landfill and incinerator waste to energy? Which one is more effective? Maybe you can answer, Arin.
I would say that I'm going to come from it at a different angle. Like, there is this tendency to want to think there's one solution that will solve everything. There's a silver bullet. It's like, stop using plastic, or everything should be recyclable, or everything should be biodegradable. The reality is, to solve a problem of this size, is we're going to need many different ways of handling plastic waste and plastic production. So on the waste to energy, yes, it is very controversial. In some places, it can be done quite well. But in other places that don't have strict environmental protection rules, it's actually can be very polluting, very poisoning. Just because the plastic is burned doesn't mean it disappears. It's just transformed into emissions, pollutants, microplastics that can become airborne. That's why we're seeing nanoplastics at the top of Mount Everest, for example. So it is not the only solution. It is a solution in a situation where there is nothing else to be done with the plastic waste. But as Lars pointed out in one of his slides, like, it's not like we're ever going to get rid of plastic. We need plastic. We need it for food prep. We need it for health and science. There's no way you can have a healthcare without plastic in the modern world. So the idea is more to think about reducing the plastic that is not essential, and then of the plastics that are essential, how best to dispose of them. Some cases that might be waste to energy, some other cases that might have to be recycling or reusing or repurposing. But so the questions that you should be asking, especially Sarah, as you pointed out on waste to energy, is ask about the emissions. Who is looking at what the air quality is around those places in Japan, or if that technology is exported to elsewhere in Asia? How are the air pollution restrictions followed? How well are they kept up? Is there water pollution? What is done to filter out microparticles? These are the kind of questions you want to ask about the environmental impact and the health impact in the area.
Lars, maybe you have any insight?
Just add, yeah, I fully agree with everything that Erin said. I've also been living in Japan for a few years. I think the main driver behind waste to energy in Japan is the lack of space for things like landfilling. On top of the questions that Irene suggested, the question I would ask is, have all other options been assessed? I mean, because waste to energy, in my view, is kind of a bit like a last resort option. If you you know, and it comes back to the earlier point that we need, in order to manage this crisis, we need measures at every stage of the life cycle of plastics, and even then there will be plastics that we don't manage to or pollution that we don't manage to control. So yeah, so just main point is waste to energy is a last resort option, which in some cases is going to be necessary.
Yeah, sure. Like I said that in Indonesia, the imported waste nowadays, it will be transferred to the RDF, and then it will be burned. as the waste to energy process. And yeah, the thing that we should criticize here in Indonesia is about the surveillance, because the technology, we need to know how the technology makes sure that the environment still protects it, and then there is no airborne from this incinerator, from this waste to energy, because that's important. Because before in 2019, I want to tell you the story that in one village in East Java, the imported plastic waste residual, it burned to be a fuel for the tofu industry. This is the villager. They are tofu industry. They using this plastic. They burn the plastic to their fuel industry, and then afterwards, there is investigated. There's a high dioxin level in this area. So this is very horrible. So that's what I want to tell, that we need to make sure that technology and make sure that there is no amplified about this issue. Okay. Now we going to the next question. There is a Cleo Stratman. Cleo is asking to Arin. Many thanks, Arin. Do you know why those sessions in between are closed for journalists, and what do they think about it? What do you think about it? I think it's for the INC process.
Yeah. Yes. I think it makes sense for them to be closed because obviously negotiators want to have the flexibility to negotiate. That's the whole point. So they want to feel like they can say their piece of what they need or what their country needs in the document. So I understand from their point of view why they want them to be closed to journalists, because we are annoying. But that's why I say you still want to get the information out, which is why you ask somebody afterwards. I can't automatically disagree that journalists should be inside. I understand the need, but I'm going to do everything I can to get around it.
Okay, I hope Cleo understand about the answer. Okay, now Romulus Dorval from New Zealand, I think. Thanks a lot for advice, Arin. Okay, now Arin again. Are the experts from organizations like Greenpeace and others always neutral?
Nope. Never. That's why you want to talk to lots of different organizations, and that's why you want to talk to the American Chemistry Council or the Coalition for Businesses. You want to talk to everybody, because no, and something as controversial as plastic, nobody's neutral.
Sure. Maybe Lars want to add something about this organization neutralized?
Not really, but I don't think we can be neutral in a way, because we will always be advocating for a certain, point or the ambition, let's say. So where we stand as an environmental organization, we put the needs of or the health of nature and people first. So in that sense, we are also not neutral. We're arguing for an agreement which is going to achieve the best possible outcome for the environment and the health of the environment and the health of people. So.
Okay, so that's the answer. Now there is Esha Lohia. Esha is asking about, are the experts from organization? Oh, sorry, I'm redundant. We have anonymous question. This is regarding environmental reporting. I often find it difficult to navigate the space of greenwashing, especially when it concerns research work on environment. How to trust the researchers' findings when you are not equipped to understand the technical jargons? Maybe you can give us something, Arin?
It's a very good question. It's very hard to navigate that, and especially if you're new to the science, it's hard to ask the follow-up questions. So my advice there is to go to multiple sources, talk to different scientists, and you can also be very candid. You can, call up I don't know, a university, or I'm trying to think, like a plastics or a chemical engineer at X or Y university, and say, like, I'm hearing this about plastic. This is what everybody's saying, or this industry is saying, like, tell me about it. And he might have one answer, but then you're going to go to another chemical engineer who will have a totally different answer. So I think it's more, unfortunately, it's the hard work of working through the science and becoming a little bit of a scientist yourself. That's the only way you're going to be able to translate science to a general audience. So yeah, it's work.
Any something, Lars? You want to add
No, I
something?
think
Okay.
in this case,
Okay, now we have Tom Jackson. He asking, the bottle deposit system is work very well in Germany, where I live, when he lives. Do the speakers, maybe he typo, have any insight on how this could be expanded to the other countries as a mechanism to reduce plastic pollution? Maybe Lars, you have something?
Well, I think, yeah, Germany has done really well on the recycling of bottles, and some other European countries have as well. It does require, I mean, what we find is that it does require a very strong, I mean, a very high degree of regulation and capacities and institutions to really manage the system. And in that sense, I think, you know, these types of approaches, they simply need to be, it's not simple at all. They need to be adapted to the contexts. I mean, yeah, the German system is magnificent, but it would work very, very differently in other contexts. And I think that's why also in some of the discussions around the treaty, you find, of course, implementing a lot of the measures that are being proposed does require new sets of regulation. It requires expanded capacities, not just infrastructure, but also institutions. So there is a lot of work to be done. And maybe a deposit system like in Germany is not the right approach in many countries. Yeah, back to you.
Okay, you have something?
Yeah, I mean, I love this question. I just got back from a reporting trip in Fiji, looking at this issue, in particular, like how to encourage recycling. And on the one side, like Fiji has been working on a bottle deposit system for about a decade now. So on one side, you need political will. You need a government that's going to push it. You need parliamentarians that are going to support it. You need public support that are going to support those parliamentarians that are going to support the bills. But that's not it. You also need a system in which those bottles can be reclaimed. Like, are they taken then to a different dump? How are they transported? How are the different mechanisms for people to reclaim that money? So you need a financial mechanism. You need also a better infrastructure. So you need a collection infrastructure, the trucks that are going to pick them up. Or is it going to be on a different day? Is it done via different bins? I think in Germany, it's via different bins. So there's all that kind of system. And then it's the sorting. Who's going to sort through the different plastics? If there's 6 different plastics, which ones can be recycled, which ones can't? Who does that? Is that a machinery? So it's actually a huge ecosystem in itself that needs to be set up in order to do something that seems as simple as a bottle deposit. And I think this is such a great area of research for a journalist, like stories of what it could be like in various different parts of the world and what it would take.
Okay, that's interesting, because we have also need to put the attention about the producer responsibility, because in these circumstances, like a bottle design, it's also make sure that this bottle can be recycled or can be put in the business cycle properly. Because if you have a bottle like another color with another bottle, it's something else. So this bottle issue is also need to get to the production area. And now we have a follow-up question. This is if you heard like Romulus questioning about the asking advice to Arin, are the experts from organization like Greenpeace and others out neutral? And he had more question about how to do when we do not have specific data about the pollution. I think it's questioning about how to access data about the pollution, like plastic or air quality or something. You have any tips or tricks to get data about the pollution? In this case, in Cameroon, I think Romulus coming from Cameroon. Do you have maybe any advice or maybe tips how to get pollution data in Cameroon, or you have any link?
Is there an environmental, I would imagine that there's got to be an environmental group in Cameroon that would be starting to track it. If there isn't published data, they might know why or where you could go. I'm afraid I don't know the scene close enough in Cameroon, but I would start there.
I think I heard a group about this African journalists in EGN. Maybe you can start finding a colleague from there, or maybe I can give you a recommendation after this. Romulus, we can follow up this.
Yogi,
Yes.
yeah, there is also some, I mean, the UN Environment Program, UNEP, is also doing quite some work on collecting different data sets, making them available on a digital platform. We will share the link in chat. I don't know the exact case of Cameroon and sort of how much is available on for Cameroon, but it's a place to also start.
So Romulus, I think you have a backup here. Don't worry. Okay. You have something to add, Arin? I think you want to speak.
A new report just came out, and I actually linked to it in the PDF that we'll send around, that it's a couple scientists out of Leeds University in the UK that has been tracking plastic pollution data around the world. And so they have really good resources. I don't know how well Cameroon is represented, but I found that their data on Fiji was phenomenal. So you might look at that in the link at the end of this session.
Okay. Now the next question is for Bernard Ogembo. Decreased media budgets for investigative journalism have adversely affected the communication of scientific information. In that complex scientific material has often been oversimplified in media reports. Moreover, critical environment issues have failed to gain coverage at all. What can we do to change this narrative? Maybe you have some tips, Arin?
You're preaching to the choir. Yes, this is true. Investigative journalism across the board, not even climate or environment, is losing out in this new media world. But organizations like the Pulitzer Center have been very, very important for funding exactly this kind of research. There's other organizations. GRID-Arendal is also funding reporting trips to reporting budgets to INC process. Many other organizations like the Investigative Journalists Association also have grants and funds. So that is probably the best way, is accessing all of these opportunities that will let you publish for your home media outlet, but with an increased budget. And I think that's probably the way we're going to have to go forward. And that's how I did, even though I work for a huge media organization, I still needed Pulitzer funding to do the kind of investigative work that I did. So.
Couldn't agree more for that. Do you have something to add, Ars? Okay, the next is about data on single-use plastic globally and country distribution as well. Is there any latest data? Maybe you have mentioned, Arin, this data is the newest data about single-use plastic globally and country distribution.
I think there should be more recent reporting, again, maybe off of this University of Leeds, but I think Lars might have more recent stuff because as the knowledge center for plastic.
Thanks. So I mean, we have not been reporting on this ourselves, but there is I'm aware of, for example, a report done by the Nordic Council for the High Ambition Coalition, produced by Systemic, which is based on modeling, and so that we can share a link to that report. That's using the OECD global plastics outlook model and sort of updating those numbers. I would have to check if there's specific data on single-use plastic, but at least there is data on the overall production and use of plastics. Yeah, I think that's the one source that comes to mind for me, which is the most current one that I'm aware of.
I would just advise everyone on this call, as a side, before I started reporting on plastic, or as I started reporting on plastic, the first thing I did was set up a series of Google alerts on plastic pollution, plastic production, plastic chemistry. And I didn't read every single story that came through, but I actually just looked at the headlines of everything that came through every day. I looked at it, and that gives you a real sense, because it will also tell you which reports just came out talking about exactly what you're looking for. And if you spend a week or two just reading the headlines and selectively clicking on certain stories, it's the greatest way to get up to speed on what new research is out there.
Okay, I think that's complete. There is, let me check if there is any other. Maybe I will give one more chance for our last question for this webinar session. Need some tips on environment reporting independently, especially when you are just 1 year into journalism. How does one make their way into the same from India? Can you give the tips, Arin, maybe?
It's tough. You have to be persistent. Keep writing for whoever you can. I would discourage you from writing for free. I think you want to always make sure that you know your worth as a journalist. So even if you're paid minimal, make sure you're paid, but get out there and just start writing. And the more you write, the more you can say to sources, I have published in this magazine or this newspaper. This is why you should talk to me. And it's like a slow moving snowball. Slowly you build an audience and an outlet. But it's work. Nobody does this to become a journalist. Like overnight is not fast and it's not lucrative, but it's fun.
Okay, now we are, maybe last one, you want to add something? Maybe
only that we are happy to connect you with resource persons in India, and well, I mean, we're also available to fast track the learning that you're going through. So
okay, now we can give final remarks from Arin. You have a conclusion about your presentation, or maybe your tips for the INC process first.
Read as much as possible, and yeah, I mean, I sort of gave you all my tips, but I hope to see lots of bylines coming out of the INC process.
Great. And Lars?
Thanks so much for the opportunity to share with you on this important topic, and as I said, we will be able to hopefully see some of you in Busan, and yeah, happy to be in touch with you to expand the knowledge on plastic pollution and why it's important that we achieve an ambitious agreement by the end of this year. So thank you.
Thank you, Lars and Arin. That's very insightful presentation and very good discussion. And I think we all agree that this session today with the webinar, it's give us a lot of things about how to cover the INC process, and then how we can be committed to these issues about the plastic issues in globally, because this is not our just now problem. This is our future problem if we do not act now or do something now. Okay. Thank you very much for all participants. For some countries, it's really great to see you here, and a great opportunity to share with you all. And I'll give now to the Fernanda, if you have something to deliver about how the participant, if they want to get something, a chance to go to the Busan. Thank you for me from Indonesia. Happy to you all.
Thank you so much, Yogi, and thank you, Aaron and Lars. It was amazing. I learned so much. I just want to thank everybody again for being with us. We will send you the recording and also the slides, so you can click in the hyperlinks at your own time. And as everybody said, we're available for questions, so if any pops up, please let us know. Thank you so much, and wishing you a great rest of your day.
Thank you. See you all.
Bye.